Hello and good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. Today's webinar is all about reducing risk with secure server patch management. My name is Heinrich Pelser. I'm head of the pre-sales team. I'll be your host for the next 25 minutes or so. And I'm also joined by my illustrious colleague, Mr. Leo Darcy, who's head of our identity and access. And we'll be handling some of the Q&A sessions towards the tail end of today. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to type them out on the chat box on the right-hand side, and we'll get to those towards the end. So let's jump straight into it. For those of you who don't know us, we're Power On Platforms. Our business offers three key services. They're managed services. So we offer managed services across the laptop and desktop estate for Windows 10. We also do a lot of good work around the mobile phone estate. And one of the other areas we're going to be discussing with you today is the smart server patching estate as well. So server patching as a service. We also offer professional services across the entirety of the EMS E3 stack, E5 stack, and in conjunction with Leo's team, we also do a lot of good work around the Azure space as well, including desktop, WVD, and all that type of stuff as well. And then finally, we also offer a sort of very dedicated support team. They're designed to help organizations with longer term sort of support needs across the second and third line space. We're a growing business. Power On Platforms has been going well over 5 years now, and the sort of total device count under our managed services is probably a little bit higher, actually. It's around 21,000 mark. Our HQ is in York, the north of England, but we do have obviously clients who spread globally, so we manage them and obviously help global organizations around the world. We're also part of Microsoft's EMS Elite Partnership Program. Really gives us some fantastic inroads into what they're doing and how they're doing it. Kind of gives us a head start, and we also get to feed into that program as well, which is really, really helpful. And then we hold 3 gold competencies, 2 silver, and they are across the cloud platform, data center, Windows devices, enterprise mobility, and data analytics. So what's today's session going to be all about? There's going to be sort of 6 key areas we wanted to go over with you guys. All of these are sort of relevant to the server patching world, talking about things like the barriers, what are clients talking about to us, what are some of the things they're having to overcome, what have we done to help reduce things like risk and time spent on these types of things, as well as then looking at, processes, how to go about doing something is also quite important. Ensuring compliance as well. So compliance is becoming a big thing these days. Sort of lots of organizations are starting to pick up the mantle around the cybersecurity essentials and essentials plus and so on. And then also look at some of the benefits we've unlocked for clients that we've worked with within this area as well. And then towards the tail end, as I mentioned earlier, my esteemed colleague, Mr. Leo Darcy, will be answering some questions. So to kind of set the scene for today, we'll be looking at some of the pain points our clients are facing when it comes to server patching. Server patching in itself is a bit of an art form, sounds very straightforward, but depending on the organization and depending on the type of services you're delivering, it can depend on how these things are managed and handled. So one of the biggest areas we find organizations struggling who might be having problems with patching is identifying a starting point where to sort of drive the issue forward. So we're going over that today, how we've identified that and what we've done to help organizations with that particular sort of pain point. The other thing as well is with investments in the Microsoft stack, third-party investments and so on, businesses have a lot of tools to use. Which one's the right one? Which one makes most sense? Which one do you want to carry on with? A consolidation exercise in tools is also very, very important when it comes to the server patching world, to make sure that you're patching the right things at the right time and obviously getting the right information back to make business decisions. Understanding risk. These could be factors involving time. Security is obviously a part of that. Things like service downtime, how we're affecting the business, and also then sort of working with these tools and solutions can carry their own risks. Doing it badly, even with the best intentions, can cause service downtime, and again, sort of really put the business at risk when it comes to productivity. Discovering a cost-effective option. This doesn't just equate itself to day rates and consultancy and buying the right thing. It also equates itself into looking at how time spent internally, things like overtime, the cost if something goes down, the impact to your clients if a service goes down, as well as then making sure that existing investments are leveraged throughout to make sure that maximum internal benefit is obviously being sort of realized when it comes to using a lot of these tools, services, as well as then making sure we're pinpointing people in the right direction on where to work. Finally, then it's around things like visibility and compliance. So we know we want to know that things are patched. We want to know that things are secure. How do we maintain that? Who gets to see the right levels of information? Who's the right person to see this information? And then what is the business going to do with it? These things can actually fit into things like compliancy, security compliancy, overall sort of business compliancy. Things like secure score can also be a factor in this as well. And then ultimately making sure that we provide the right level of confidence to the stakeholders within the business that the job's being done properly. So when it comes to removing some of these barriers, what are they? First thing we need to do is obviously understand so we can obviously help drive things forward. One of the biggest ones we're seeing is, where do I start? Sometimes we've walked into organizations with limited to no patching capabilities across their server estate. And I think pinpointing these are the ones we'll do first can be a real challenge. So we've worked on some good work around how to mitigate that. That's in the next slide. Multiplicity of tools. Organizations have many tools to do many things. Sometimes these things overlap. Even natively within your infrastructure, they overlap, even if you're just a Microsoft house. You could have System Center tools. They can do the job. So can WSAS. But lots of businesses have third-party tools, which can be sometimes cumbersome, a little bit difficult to learn, and require updating, ironically, which is a struggle. Towards the tail end of that as well is trying to find responsibility. Who's doing what and when are they doing it? What are the risks associated to that? And where do we go from there? So when it comes to removal of some of those barriers, what are some of the things we're talking about? How have we helped? So when it comes to obviously a starting point, a server environment onboarding is something we like to think is key, because what that does, it identifies a starting point for you. And those starting points are usually sort of centered around the most vulnerable services within the organization. In consolidation with that, consolidation happens in terms of the tool set. Our managed services is sort of primed and driven by the Azure stack. So getting rid of some of those multiplicity of tools really does drive business benefit in a couple of areas. Reduces complexity massively, and off the back of that as well, everything from a consolidated place means you have far greater control. So working quite closely with clients across that also benefits the back pocket. What do we mean by that? A lot of the stuff we're talking about here, especially relevant to the smart teaming service we're talking about, it's a pay-as-you-go model. So you can scale up and down at will. So that obviously does offer organizations some real key business benefits when it comes to sort of patching the server estate, which again, by definition, is going to drive up things like business confidence, making sure that the key services they provide both internally and externally are fully catered for and patched. The big thing then as well, and what we strive for as a business, is accountability and transparency. So we like to look at who's doing what, when are they going to do it, and so on and so on. And these things are all sort of matched and helped by the fact that everything is pre-agreed, making sure that anything we do put in place in terms of help is agreed to, fully understood, and the business is on board from top to bottom as well. One of the other areas that's become a key focus is around things like time. It's one of the most important things we have as organizations and as people. So what are the sort of things organizations are trying to get rid of? What are they struggling with? So one of the big things we're seeing is multiple manual processes. So lots of people doing lots of work on key items, absolutely true. But what's the impact of this? When IT staff are heavily sort of saturated in terms of their time spent on things like patching, how much are they doing for the business? Again, something we're seeing a lot of IT directors come to us with wanting to mitigate. Local consideration, when everything's up to date, and also understanding the impact of your environment is going to be something that's key. So what does that mean? Ultimately speaking, providing the right level of patching services to critical business items is something that's very important. People struggle with that at times because you know what? Leaving something for a long time was a favored option for IT departments. And again, the other thing then is around things like structure. Lots of businesses these days are either forced into patching, which in itself can be a problem, making things very time consuming because it's something that might be new or high impact to the business, especially around things like new services. So how have we helped to remove some of those obstacles? One of the biggest things we strive for is around things like automation. We like to do things very carefully, especially if they're repetitive tasks, to make sure that the right amount of time is spent automating something as opposed to having to do the hard work manually, person by person. Reduces risk, and off the back of that as well, far more cost effective when you haven't got a body. It's never sick. Scripts never take sick days. So lots of time is spent doing that, so organizations feel, the right processes are in place to make sure, we cater for it regardless. Very, very complex environment. Things like SQL workloads, Exchange a big one, and then also making sure things happen when you want them to happen and how you want them to happen within your maintenance windows. We also like to do our things around bandwidth optimization. We understand that throwing data down at servers, even within a sort of very robust server environment, in itself can have impact. These things massively sort of manifest in things like bandwidth optimization and utilization. So making sure we don't take things down and things don't take too long to happen on servers is also something we take very, very seriously as well. So minimizing the bandwidth with time requests and requirements is something we do very, very well. Things like WSUS caching is part of that equation as well, meaning we can pre-stage a lot of the content preemptively so they're consumed locally as opposed to being downloaded from something like the cloud. In terms as well, we like to have a phased approach to things. Pilot, UAT, phased automation sort of deployment approaches is something we found very, very helpful and critical for organizations to make sure things happen on time without having time impact to the internal teams themselves. So what are some of the other impacts we're seeing as part of this that businesses are talking to us about? One of these things is, unfortunately, due to poorly managed or repetitive process sometimes going wrong, you can have unplanned service downtime. Now, we're in IT, it's an occupational hazard. We all signed up to it, we know what we're doing, that's what support's there for. However, we want to make sure we do everything we can to stack the odds in our favor to minimize that. That then has a natural impact around IT, ironically, spending a long time to fix it. So IT teams are then forced into doing something that wasn't planned themselves, ironically. Therefore, other things start to have an impact. BAU support has an impact because IT teams are busy. Projects start to stall or attention deviates to fixing issues and resolutions around business services. And then toward the tail end of there's something that isn't always obvious to IT guys and to IT teams, as a matter of fact, it's around things like the bottom line. The bottom line can get affected very, very quickly because of this, and it has happened to a lot of businesses that we know about as well. In conjunction with that, the other problem we sort of seem to think about there is things like reputational damage. You're not just doing damage to the IT team itself, which sometimes happens, but also then to the organization itself. The business not being able to supply a service, especially on external facing infrastructure, can have an impact to a client base. Now, therefore, from a competitive perspective, can have some impacts that, again, aren't always obvious. So naturally speaking, how can we help? One of the biggest things we would like to do as well is to have a structured automated deployment approach. Now, that in itself will affect the amount of business interruptions drastically. Things happen according to a maintenance window, which is phased and automated. Off the back of that, we monitor everything that goes on. In terms of that as well, it then means if anything should go wrong, if anything does go wrong, we naturally are an ally to the IT team to make sure any service disruptions are quickly mitigated, or they don't happen at all, as a matter of fact. The point there being is that IT can focus around business critical or mission critical services towards the teams internally, as well as in the wider business, as Param's got you back in that regard. The other thing it also reinforces around things is making sure that you've got good business value. So confidence can be quickly restored or maintained, as a matter of fact, by having the right people doing the right jobs at the right time, making sure that nothing happens that you're not expecting. So, when it comes to ensuring compliance and security, it's quite a broad topic. What are business talking to us about? When organizations wish to offload some of their patching services, one of the biggest things they're struggling with is to get the right person involved, or the right partner, as a matter of fact. Can you work with my security needs? Can you fit around my timeframes? Can you fit around my compliancy rules? I'm going towards Cyber Essentials and part of either a NIST framework or the NCSE guidance. Can you support that? Some businesses tend to offer a static service as a response to that, which isn't always the best thing. So from our side, we've done a lot of work to make sure that actually isn't the case, and we can mold the service around your good selves. The right levels of visibility is also quite important, making sure that everything is clearly defined in terms of the service contracts, as well as who's doing what, when it's going to happen. We've obviously touched about that earlier. Is going to be critical as part of that. And also, you're letting someone in, whether that be a partner or an individual. How does this happen? What's involved? We like to make sure that auditing is definitely part of that remit as well. So what's exposed, what isn't exposed? How do all these things sort of tie together to make sure that businesses going down this road are doing what's right for them, and at the same time, is it safe? So one of the first things we wanted to try and do as an organisation is to make sure that the service itself is malleable and supports not just the basics around best practice, but also around anything else businesses need to think about. These things can be around things like the NCSC guidance, the Cyber Essentials Plus, and so on, as well as then PCI compliance. So defining a 30 or a 14-day window for patching was something that we knew was quite important to us. We wanted to make sure businesses could really take advantage of that under the service. Things like, for example, consolidated visibility. Things happen through Power BI here at PowerOn. So they're not just the right information, it's also pretty. We can also make that available to the right person at the right time, as well as then provide things like dashboards and distributed views to obviously support wider IT requirements. Around things like access, naturally, even if it's a tool, our services are massively driven across the Azure stack, making sure that we have detailed security auditing, role-based access controls, and so on, means we have the right person with the right skills at the right time with the right permissions to carry things out as they need to happen, making sure that everything is fully automated and both you and us have got full visibility as to what's going on and when it happened and how it happened as well. Massive plus point for everyone on that front. So in response to everything we've just discussed, the smart teaming service was born, specifically around things like Windows patching. It by itself follows one of our key design principles, which is KISS. That itself is keeping it simple. It's designed to scale, be molded, as well as very flexible for businesses to adopt at a rate of knots and then scale up and down as they require. So what are some of the key bits and pieces that make up this service from a considerations perspective? We wanted to make it scalable, so on-premise and cloud workloads from a Windows Server perspective are supported off the bat. The service itself has to be mindful. We know that organizations have very, very critical workloads. Those critical workloads need to be handled carefully. So extra time is spent on automating the patching routines, as well as then some of the checks that has to happen around those critical servers. In addition to that as well, the system, the service, and the process all have to be aware. Things like cluster-aware updating, complex server workloads that handle spread applications, something like a SharePoint infrastructure as well, is definitely something we wanted to take particular care in to minimize things like service downtime. In addition to that, we talked about some of the rapid deployment mechanisms. Those things specifically around things like Cyber Essentials Plus require a much more consolidated patching window around the 14-day mark, as well as then also making sure that we can cater for the sort of usual, traditional best practice 31-day marks as well. So making the service scale up and down at will is something that we thought was very, very important. And again, around things like transparency, making available all of the relevant patching data, whether that be raw data and sort of analytical data, as well as then the sort of compliancy data we know is very, very important to business. Off the bat, as part of a standard package, we thought was obviously a massive plus. So with all of those considerations around the smart teaming server patching, what are some of the benefits that businesses are starting to unlock as part of this? So once things are in full swing, what are some of the benefits that businesses can realize as part of this service? One of the first ones is making sure that things are secure and up to date. Again, with that peace of mind, business is definitely winning when it comes to that. The second one being it removes risks and patching time. We're doing it and we're automating it. So things are happening quicker, by design and on purpose. Third one being it ensures a holistic, all-encompassing patching strategy when it comes to the Windows Server estate. We don't leave any stone unturned, and we do make sure that everything happens when it's supposed to happen. Removal of manual processes. We've talked about this several times now as well. The basic premise of this is around freeing up time, make sure that guys aren't spending time doing what they're not supposed to be doing, and your IT team can really focus on what matters to you, and that's providing obviously internal services and great support off the bat. And finally, visibility. Making sure that the right information is available to the right people at the right time is a massive benefit. Everything's happening at a single source from a single place across your server environment. So making sure that the right data is there definitely can help make some very clever business decisions as things go forwards. I'm happy to hand over to Mr. Leo Darcy now for us to go through some of the questions. You guys probably will experience some jiggery pokery in terms of the screens and stuff flickering around, but if you bear with us, hopefully that won't be too impacting. But just give us a couple of seconds and then we'll get to some of your questions for today. There we go. Thank you very much, guys. So off the bat, are you there, Leo? Can you hear me all right?
Yep, I'm here.
Fantastic. So we've had a couple of questions coming in, and the first one is around some of the support. So in terms of the remediation side of things, what are some of the processes and things we would go through should something occur that requires support?
So our default level of service is to try and analyze the issue. So what we're talking about here is if, for example, a patch doesn't install correctly, what do we do as a managed service around that? So our default level of service is to analyze the Windows update logs provided via the update service. I attempt to identify the most likely causes of the issue, and this can be something simple as the server being out of disk space, for example. And in that case, we then email a specified customer contact and ask them to remediate the issues before we then attempt a second time to install the update. If you have an enablement support contract with ourselves, which allows for us to provide ad hoc administration of your systems on your behalf, then depending on the issue, we can then access the machine in question. We can potentially perform an in-depth analysis of the failure if required, if it's not an obvious issue. And then depending on the issue, we can also provide remediation on the customer's behalf. For example, if we have the permission and the access, then we can go in and extend the server's storage if that is required by the customer.
Excellent, that's really good. Thank you for that, Leo. Another question's come in with regards to some of the automation. So can we run pre and post sort of update automation or patch automation on the servers?
So yes, this is obviously absolutely key when you're talking about kind of patching clusters, things like Hyper-V or Exchange clusters, those kinds of things, where you need to drain the host that you're about to patch before it then reboots, and then allow things to back onto it afterwards. So in that case, what we can do is we can write custom scripts, custom PowerShell scripts, I should be more specific, and they can then run before and after the server is designated in the patch window. Those can either be provided by the customer, or again, using enablement support, we can assist with the writing of those scripts.
Excellent, that's really good. And then in terms of, so everything we discussed today has obviously been centered around things like the Windows environment, specific to Microsoft. But in terms of third-party based sort of server operating systems like Linux and Unix, is there any support for that currently?
So the tools that we use do support Linux. Unfortunately, at this time, we don't offer Linux managed patching as a managed service.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Thank you. And then finally, one here as well is there any support for manual patching intervention or patching services?
So we don't currently have any solutions in the marketplace, but we are hoping to have some things coming out soon that would address this particular need. So if it is something that you believe is a requirement, then still feel free to reach out and we can kind of discuss your requirements in more detail.
Excellent, thank you very much. And then I suppose it's just sort of worth wrapping things up in a bit of a bow toward the tail end here as well. So in terms of the Windows support services, we can only really support services where Microsoft make patches available to them. So any legacy type server architectures will need some careful considerations around things like physical support, end of life support, and so on as well. And we also made, again, just to reinforce the point, we're happy to support the patching of Windows-based services, both on-premise as well as then with your Azure stack as well. So I think that pretty much sort of does it for all the questions for today and everything else. Information is on the screen if you guys want us to get in touch to find out anything more. Please feel free to obviously reach out to your account manager or directly to us here at info at poweronplatforms.com, as well as then through all the sort of general social media channels. So any questions on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever the case might be, we're also happy to answer those. And obviously towards the bottom there is our Power On Platforms website. So any questions or anything, please feel free to get in touch. And thank you so much for today's attendance. Thanks, guys.